So today we're going to be looking at nth roots. So we've seen square roots. We've done a lot with those. In geometry, we're doing a lot with those right now as well. But today we're going to see cube roots, fourth roots, fifth roots, 10th roots. Okay? So we're looking at nth roots, which will look like this. Okay. Normally we just see a square root symbol and there's no 2. But today we'll see other things. So since 5 squared is 25, then we can conclude that 5 is a square root of 25. Squared gets you 25, square root, we get you back to 5. Since 5 cubed is 125, then we can conclude that 5 is a cube root of 125. And the cube root would look like this. And I'll show you how to do it in your calculator. Since 5 to the 4th is 625, then we can conclude that 5 is a fourth root of 625. You're kind of observing the pattern. Next one is 5 to the 5th is 3,125. Therefore, 5 would be a...
Please excuse the interruption. All Western areas for your technology students are to report to the cafeteria at the beginning of period 2. Thank you.
Which leads us to the definition of any nth root. For any real numbers a and b, and any positive integer n, if a to the n power is b, then a, the base, before you raise it to the nth power, is the nth root of that b variable. So again, since 5 cubed equals 125, we know that if we were to kind of switch this over and make it a root, the cube root of 125 would be 5. Now, sometimes we have to investigate positive and negatives. So 2 to the 4th, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 would be 16. Negative 2, in parentheses to the 4th, would that be positive 16 or negative 16? Garrett? Positive 16 also. Therefore, both 2 and negative 2 would be fourth roots of 16. So if I ask you to take the fourth root of 16, you'll have to include that, our favorite, the plus or minus symbol. Now, 2 to the third power, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Negative 2 to the third power would be negative 8. So if we take the cube root of 8, we're not going to have positive and negative with it. So only 2 is a cube root of 8. So you'll notice that when the root is even, you're going to have 2 answers, typically. When the root is odd, you're only going to have 1 answer, either a positive or a negative. Now, are there any values of x that would satisfy the following? X to the 4th equals negative 16. Is there any number that if we raised it to the 4th power would get us negative 16? Any number, if we multiplied it by itself 4 times, would get us a negative 16. Even if you chose negative 2, we would have all the negatives canceling out to be a positive. Okay? So if you see something being raised to an even root, it can't be getting a negative number. Okay, and that's why you'll see that the type of the number is negative. The number of real nth roots when n is even are none, because you can't take the root of an even root of a negative number. How about x squared equals 10? Can we find out what number squared would get us 10? Might not be a whole number.
Take the square root.
Yeah, take the square root. So it'd be positive or negative square root of 10. When you square that, you get 10. So it is possible to get something that's not a perfect square, fourth, cube, but you can't have it becoming a negative if it's an even root. Okay? So This chart kind of tells you this, but even roots will have a plus or minus. Odd roots will only have a plus or a minus. It's either a positive or a negative. You don't give it both answers. So if you have a cube root, a fifth root, a seventh root, a ninth root, an 11th root, those are all going to have only a positive or negative depending on the symbol. And then you do want to remember that you cannot take an even root of a negative number, which is what we have circled there. So down here, find all of the real roots. You can do these by hand if you want, or you can do them with a calculator. So let's also drop down on our for the calculator what we'll press for these. Put this here. Anyone know how to get the cube root on the calculator? Sam? Yes. We'll press the math key, and you'll see that the cubing button's right there. The cube root is right below it. So it's math option 4 for the cube root. Now, if you want to do a fifth root, a sixth root, a seventh root, you'll use the X root button, which is the same screen, math, and then it would be option 5. Now, if you're taking an X root, you have to tell the calculator what to plug in for X, and I'll show you that one. Here, let's just skip down to it and do number 7 right now. So if you want to find the fourth root of 625, in your calculator, okay, go back to your home screen, you have to type in the number you're putting in the root spot. So if you want to take the fourth root, you have to press 4, then press your math button, choose option 5, which is your X root. Now those of you with a newer calculator, it probably actually puts that number in for you. Our old calculators do not, they just put it up front. So this is not 4 times, this is taking the 4 and plugging it in as X. And then we would type in our 625. And we'll get 5. Now your calculator will only tell you positive 5. However, you have to remember that since this is an even root, this would be a positive and a negative 5, technically. Because if you raise negative 5 to the 4th power, or positive 5. All right, so let's go through and do some of these. The square root of a very small number. We're not going to do all of these since we took a while on the homework. So we have 3 zeros after the decimal. So we will get 1/100th, or 0.01. And since this is a square root, which is even, we do attach a plus or minus. How about the square root of -1? It asks us to find all real roots, so not imaginary. What is the square root of -1 normally? I, just I, would be I. But we want real roots, so there would be no real roots. This is because it's a negative, and this is an even root. It's not possible to get a real answer. We could get I if we were doing imaginary, but you can either write none or no real roots. The square roots of 36 over 121. I would not type this one in my calculator. You can if you want, but I would just square root it by hand. So the square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 121 is 11. So 6/11ths. And then we do need our plus or minus. Why don't you go through and see if you can fill out the rest of them, and then we'll go over them before we flip to the back. Or we're going to simplify square roots that have algebra in them. All right, and on the back what we're going to do is we're going to simplify radicals that are not just square roots. So in geometry class right now, for those of you doubling up, we've been simplifying square roots a lot. We're also going to simplify cube roots in this chapter, and fourth roots and fifth roots. So we'll be looking into that a little bit more. So just some vocab. Radicand is the number underneath the radical sign. Index is the type of root you're taking, second, third, etc. And then your radical sign, of course, is here. And the principal root is the positive root only. So for a lot of these that already have the symbol drawn in, we'll just assume that it has a positive only out front. But if that weren't there, you can always put the plus or minus. So we'll probably skip over some of these. These are just like on the front. But what would the cube root of, this is just using symbols instead of words, what would the cube root of negative 1,000 be? The cube root of negative 1,000 be? Awesome. Negative 10. How about the square root of negative 81? None. Okay. We're going to skip over the next few, but in case anyone wanted to do them, they're negative 3, 3, and 7. I'm going to make sure we get down to our algebra examples down here. So, something you have to be careful of is when you have these variables in here. When you take the nth root of anything to an even power, okay, so if you take the square root of, say, x squared, we know that the square and the square root just kind of cancel each other out, so we should just get x. Technically, you should be putting x in the absolute value symbols. Okay, why? Well, if x were negative 2, negative 2 squared is 4, and then the square root of 4 would get you 2. But you need to evaluate that it could be positive or negative when you plug it in, square it, and then square root it. So once you take away the square, you really should be putting an absolute value around it. Only if it's an even root. Oops. Yeah. Even exponent, let's say. So if you were to take a root and end up getting like x cubed as your answer, you don't need to put absolute values around it. So simplify each radical expression. So you are basically, you don't have to do the work for this every time. You're basically splitting this up in your head though. Like square root of 4, square root of x squared, square root of y to the 4th. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of x squared would be x, but we do need absolute values around it. And the square root of y to the 4th would be what? What squared gets us y to the 4th? Y to the 2nd. You're basically just dividing the exponent by the root. 4 divided by 2 will get you 2. Now, this was even, so normally I would put absolute value bars around it. However, since it's still going to get squared, even if it still remains negative, it would become positive. So you really don't need these. These are not necessary because of the square that's there. So really it would just be 2 absolute value of x times y squared. If you put the y squared in absolute values, I'm not going to get mad about it, but technically since it's going to get squared anyways at the end, it would still remain positive. Okay. What is the cube root of negative 27? Negative 3. And then again, for our exponents, we're going to divide these. 6 divided by 3 would get me c to the 2nd. Again, normally since this is even, we would put absolute value bars, but since it's still having an even power, if it were negative, it's going to get squared to make it positive anyway, so you can leave that. Okay, next one, no numbers, so we just need to divide these. So 8 divided by 4 would get me x squared. 12 divided by 4 would get me y cubed. Now, double check. This was even. When I took the root, it's still even, so you don't need to put the absolute value bars. But this one was even. It is now odd. So you would need to put absolute value bars because when you raise something to an odd power, it can stay negative, whereas it should remain positive. The next one, what would we get here? The square root of 9x to the 10th. Sam? Perfect. Was even, is now odd. We need to absolute value it. Next one's pretty easy actually. Divide each of those, we'll just get AB. You do not need absolute value bars around this one because it was not even to start. Again, if you put them, I probably won't care, but technically you don't need them. And the last one, we would divide these to get x squared and y to the 1st. Do either of those need absolute value bars around them, Garrett? Just the y. Okay. We'll go over this clip. Oh, No, let's do it real quick. I think it's on your homework. Volume formula for a cone with base radius r and height r, should say height of h, no, height of r, is 1/3 pi r cubed. Find the radius to the nearest hundredth of centimeter if the volume is 40 centimeters cubed. So we are going to plug in 40 for volume. And we're going to have to solve for r. So the first thing you want to do is multiply by 3 on both sides to get 120. Then you would undo multiplication with division. So divide by pi on both sides. And then the last step would be to cube root both sides. Just like our last step is to square root, the last step would be to cube root. And then this will go into your calculator. So we would just press our math button, our cube root, and you would want to use your pi key. So it would be 120 divided by pi. And then round your answer to the nearest hundredth. The homework is on Google Classroom tonight. Oh, thank you. It actually gets you a different number completely because you're cube rooting that. So 3.7. Thank you, Abby.